Good morning, folks. These are the detailed instructions for the research assignment. Start this assignment earlier rather than later. It's due around July 5th. All assignments need to be turned in by July 8th, so if it's late, you need to have it in by July 8th so I can post grades on July 9th. You have two choices for the paper. Choose one, not both. And the first choice is to read the entirety of our class's main primary source, Margaret Jarman Hagood's Mothers of the New South. Remember, this is what it looks like. Now, the goals and approaches for this paper are to read the book and then write a research paper, not a book review or summary of events in the books, in which you examine Hagood's book as the outcome of 10 years of responses to the Great Depression. How do you see this book as a progressive era modernized and applied to the Great Depression? How does the book itself, as published research, represent federal government's new goals? How are academics getting in and reflecting New Deal's main assumptions and strategies? How have those strategies evolved? And how are academics now part of the response to the Great Depression? Now, the intellectual goals here are to identify Hagood's approach as a sociologist and link that approach to both long-term and short-term trends in eradicating poverty in America. But also, I want you to root her study in the New Deal specifically, or not, to the second New Deal. This is very much indicative in some ways of the second New Deal, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And remember to read the assignment sheet for more information about this. Now, there's a lot of good information on JSTOR, including our obit. You can also find sections in David Kennedy's book. And there's also a good encyclopedia article, and this is an academic encyclopedia. ABC Clio is an academic publisher. That makes this one okay to use as opposed to Wikipedia. Keep in mind that Hagood was part of a lot of academics who were getting into living with communities. And so she's part of a bigger trend, which included Hortense Powdermaker, an anthropologist, John Dollard, a psychologist. All of these folks lived in the community. It's called ethnographic research. They lived in the community and did participant observations. That's what Margaret Jarman Hagood does as well. And so think about the book as part of a larger trend in the mid to late 1930s. Now, how to proceed with option one. First of all, read the whole book, especially section 3. Explore JSTOR and Project Muse, both of them on the library's database. They will be very helpful. And David Kennedy's book, Freedom from Fear, those pages will also be helpful. Think about the ways that Hagood represents both how progressive women did their work as well as how she is a break from them. And then think about ethnography, as I've just identified as participant observation as a scientific strategy. Now, your second choice is to use the 1940 census as data for a research paper. And you're not going to look just at one or two pages. You're going to look at multiple pages and then figure out which ones work best. Now, the 1940 federal census is considered by some the New Deal census. What that means is that the questions that were generated initially to be asked were done in order to measure effect. So evaluate sections from the census. You get to choose which ones, but you're going to have to look at a lot of pages to have enough information to write. And then write a paper that determines whether the New Dealers had been effective or not, and then ascertain why or why not. Now, one of the things that you might find is that the issue isn't the census. The issue is or the information gathered. It's the census itself. So think about this broadly. If you go in wanting to prove the New Deal was successful or it wasn't successful, then you've written a really biased paper that reflects your beliefs rather than an historical reality. But if you get to know these documents before diving into the research, meaning Look at the questions that are being asked. Look at the ways that it's structured. Look at the ways people present themselves. You know, you've got somebody from the community coming and asking you, can you read? And what are you going to answer? Well, that depends. So get to know the documents before diving into your research. What did the census takers want to know? Why did they ask these specific questions? Was this a limited mechanism to measure effect or not? And remember, these are human beings talking to human beings. So think about the ways that people will frame their answers at the people that are being measured, the people being counted. Now, where to start? It's easy. Just Google 1940 census and you should get this. You want to work from the archives because it's free. National Archives, excuse me. If you work through Ancestry.com, you've got to pay for that. The census is free. If you want to understand the questions and things like that and other FAQs, start with the questions asked. Now, there are a couple ways to approach this paper. Start with your own family. I mean, it's a reasonable way and work from there. It's perfectly reasonable. But this may limit you if your family wasn't in an area where the New Deal was particularly effective, or the mechanisms to measure, for example, the questions asked, couldn't count that effect. Well, and some students, the last time I did this, struggled with this because it was hard to find stuff in their family. So you're not just going to look at one family there, you're going to look at multiple families. And you might think of the ways that these are neighborhoods of people, especially if your family's from the rural South, and how these folks interacted with each other. So it's not just one family, it's multiple. It's a starting point, not an end point. The second way to approach the paper would be to read through the various enumeration districts. An enumeration district, think of a county broken up into more containable little districts called enumeration districts. And I think Rutherford County had 24. I don't remember specifically. But within each enumeration district, they'll count everyone, and there can be anywhere from 10 to 35 pages of people listed on those records. Read through the enumeration districts and look for one with a CCC camp in it, or some other New Deal program that's obviously there. Now that's sort of setting it up to be biased, and so I get that. The Blue Ridge Parkway had a lot of activity on it. The Appalachian Trail, someplace where we know the New Deal actually was active, or roadways were built. Cities would have more information, probably, but not necessarily, than rural areas too. But be aware of how the census may or may not have been able to measure effect well. Now, requirements for either choice. Utilize the professional standards used by historians, namely that this should have primary or endnotes or footnotes. You should be looking into the use of other secondary and primary source material. I've shared that with you for Hagood. In terms of the census, I would really use Kennedy and other documents that from the course in the paper if it's applicable. And you should have a formation of a clear argument with evidence from the book, and that should also say census. Other professional requirements for this paper, no matter the choice, are a title page, page numbers, double-spaced, 1-inch margins. Go look at the assignment sheet located in the content section. No parenthetical cites may be used, and in fact, I will subtract substantial points if you do that, and bibliographies are optional. Now, citations for those of you who have not taken historian's craft or teaching historical thinking. Remember that there are 3 times to cite: a direct quote, someone's original idea, remember the IU certificate task, or obscure information. If you're talking about some sort of farm implement, I'm not going to know what that is, and you might drop down and give me a citation about what it is. You cite 1 time per paragraph, not multiple times. Make sure your cursor is where you want your note, which is typically at the end of the last punctuation in the paragraph before clicking insert. And to set up the citation, follow these instructions. First of all, click insert, scroll down to footnote, click on footnote, and at this point you have a choice to have footnotes or endnotes. And here's the thing. I don't care which one you use. If your paper's too long, use endnotes. If your paper's too short, use footnotes. It'll extend it. Remember, the paper has to be 8 to 10 pages. And then you'll get an image that looks like this. This is from one of the some work that I was doing. And you'll notice that your cursor's here and you simply start typing in the information. Now, these are typical forms. These are not bibliographic cites. Bibliographic cites are last name first. Citations in a paper, footnotes and endnotes, are first name, last name. Secondary sources are pretty standard. This is an example of what it should look like. First name, last name, title, place, publisher, date, period. If you have specific page numbers, they should go before the period. If it's a primary source, what kind of source? What author is it? Date, where did you find it? Web address or archive. Here are some examples that you can use of a secondary source or a primary source. And resources for citations. The MTSU library website has some useful stuff. Purdue OWLS. OWLS is a online English citation thing at Purdue University. And come talk to me. That's my job. I'm supposed to help you. So we can meet and we can work on those together. Finally, I will open up a late Dropbox for this, but you will only have a few days to finish the paper. And good luck. This one is fun. I hope you have a good time with this.